It's our responsibility to hold the chairman responsible for these actions. I think the evidence is overwhelming that was presented here today. There were attacks in violation of the party bylaws, and we as a committee need to stand up and have consequences to those actions.
No matter how much Republican leadership wants to claim that Ohio is a vibrant state that is great to live in, we have lost congressional seats in 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010 census. And we lost a congressional seat in, you guessed it, the 2020 census. Ohio is not expanding. It's no laughing matter. We had 24 congressional seats in the 1960 census, and now we will be down to 15 seats in the 2022 midterms. That is a decrease of nearly 38%. Northern Ohio's largest cities are controlled by Democrats and have seen a mass exodus. They have been unable to reinvent themselves when the Steel Belt transformed into the Rust Belt. Toledo and Cleveland are shadows of their former selves. Cleveland has lost half of its population, and Toledo nearly a third of its population since the 1960s. The management of these cities is dragging the entire state down, and seemingly Republicans have no plans to address the problem. As Democrats have taken control of urban populations, we see other dramatic losses, such as in Youngstown, Dayton, and Akron. Democrat control of Ohio's urban centers is devastating Ohio, and so is inept leadership by the Republican Party. That does not have a vision in dealing with this cancer.
We've seen a lot of things go wrong with our state over the last 60 years. And as a conservative mother, I don't see those solutions being affixed by Republicans that hold a supermajority in the Ohio House and Senate and hold all of these state offices. The only thing I see is that we are stymied in getting conservative policies passed. We see who gets the most amount of money from the Ohio budget, too. Democrat-run cities do. Why do we give the cities with the most corruption and no plans of recovery the most amount of money? The only reason why Columbus, Ohio seems to work is because it is the capital and most taxpayer and federal monies go there. We can't keep fooling ourselves. We're only keeping up appearances. And we cannot afford this reckless course. Those that say Ohio's a purple state and a hardcore conservative candidate cannot win a statewide office, then they got to explain Reagan and explain Trump.
We don't need to sacrifice our principles to win. That is what we have been doing for years. We need to look at our language and our education, or our lack thereof. Our success lies in our delivery and education of the issues. When Republicans don't educate, Democrats will. It's no wonder that all the cities with major taxpayer-funded universities and college vote Democrat.
Our state is spending much more per capita than the growing states like Texas and Florida. The opioid epidemic here is out of control. Human trafficking is worse than an epidemic problem. Republican leadership has embraced Common Core in our schools. Republican leadership has made appointments that support unanimously critical race theory in our schools. And we have a governor that openly criticized a ban on transgenderism in Ohio high school and college athletics. That's biological men competing against biological females. A governor that appointed a health director that would not fight the ability for someone to change the gender on their Ohio birth certificate. Republican leadership has spent billions on green energy Democrat boondoggles through the Third Frontier Project. The expansion of Obamacare through Medicaid has nearly bankrupted the state of Ohio, and it is only getting worse. With all the Republicans elected, we still do not have voter photo ID. We don't have it passed into law, nor do we have a simple thing like ballot receipts so that we Ohioans can double check if our vote was tallied correctly. We have Republican leadership encouraging mass absentee voting, the voting type that has the biggest risk of cheating. We have party leadership that endorsed John Kasich for president over President Trump. Kasich is the same guy that spoke at the Democrat National Convention. We now have a governor that makes a commercial supporting BLM and the notion that Ohio is somehow systemically racist. And this is after he let the State House be attacked. There is an immediate and wholesale rejection of independent audits for our elections. Those audits would provide a greater confidence of the election process. And sanctuary cities have not been outlawed. Why? And of course, the spectacularly bad judgment of appointing a pro-abortion Obama supporter to the Ohio Department of Health. With Republicans like these, who needs Democrats? And seriously, why is abortion alive and well in Ohio? It is because we have not been electing Republicans. We have been electing purple centrists when we need solid red solutions. And whose fault is that? That is the fault of the Ohio Republican State Central Committee and its various county central committees. They are at the root of the problem. State Central Committee members have become complacent in their jobs. They are expecting management to run the party, and many do not realize their own duty to Ohio's registered Republicans. Our state and county central committee members do not realize that they are to lay out a vision and a mission of the party and develop short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals. Not the chairman, not the management. And many do not realize that the chairman of the party is an employee that works for them and not the other way around. The state Republican Central Committee has been negligent for many years in drafting a state platform for Ohio. A platform is their highest responsibility to draft. A state platform lets Ohioans know what the party stands for. It is a rallying point for Republicans, and a good platform helps to raise funds all year round.
Any economist will tell you having more takers than makers is a recipe for disaster. Ohio has more on the take than on the make. Ohio's been since 2010 and still is a death spiral state. We can see this even as Governor DeWine is welcoming a record number of refugees into our state. Our population is still shrinking. We are transforming our state for the worse, not for the better. We are not able to absorb such huge hits to the economy, supporting refugee populations that will undoubtedly keep our major cities solidly Democrat. With no will to outlaw sanctuary cities, Ohio is slowly becoming a socialist utopia. Will Republican State Central Committee members grow a spine and do what is right when we are down to 12 congressional seats? Maybe 10 they'll do something right. What will it take for you to realize the status quo is status crap and that the State Central Committee owns the status quo? Ohio, the birthplace of so many amazing things, lost its amazingness in the 1970s.
We can make Ohio amazing again. It all starts with the State Central Committee growing a spine and doing what is morally and ethically right. And we do have too many lawyers that are advising our leadership on what's legal and what isn't. And our first instinct with State Central Committees should be to just do what is right.
The State Central Committee needs to do its job and give its employees direction. They need to draft a state platform. The RNC national platform is not a state-based platform. We have issues unique to Ohio that need to be addressed.
Things really started going south when Governor Gilligan in the early 1970s passed a personal income tax on Ohioans. The promise back then was that we would never have high property taxes. Guess what? We have high property taxes and high income tax. The Democrat, they put in place the income taxes, and the Republicans should remove the income taxes and let more people keep their own hard-earned money. Texas and Florida, both vibrant and growing states, have no income tax. Now just tell me why we cannot replicate their huge success.
Eliminating the income tax would be a great platform plank for the Ohio Republican Party. There are a number of short-term and long-term planks that the party should adopt in a platform that they hold candidates accountable to. Letting Republican candidates decide the platform has not served us well. There is no long-term plan that spans many administrations that allows us to see the light at the end of the tunnel. The only thing we are having done now is the tweaking of the machine. We really need a whole new machine.
And if you're not setting goals and giving your employees direction, you'll never win the war. I have 6 children, 5 served in the military, and when you go to war, if you don't have a plan and just tell the soldiers to all go do their own thing, you will lose. Now let's put that plan together already. The plan is what you need to raise funds and rally the troops. You cannot be afraid of upsetting the status quo or by fears that things will never change.
Now I know there's been quite a lot of misinformation going around that is purposefully meant to confuse and intimidate State Central Committee members. The chairman has even responded to efforts of having County Central Committee chairs draft a resolution on opposing what's going on. Here are the facts.
So what happened? The chairman has been making millions of dollars of contributions to incumbent candidates that have not been endorsed. He said those donations were at his discretion and that they were lawful. Ohio does not have a specific misappropriation statute. Typically, misappropriation is charged as theft, and it is when an employee uses funds or services beyond the scope of the consent of their employers. At issue are 2 direct contributions to the DeWine and Yost campaigns totaling nearly $1 million. And there are also many in-kind contributions of candidate services made to all incumbent statewide officers totaling over $660,000. To begin with, and to be clear, these donations are inarguably made during the primary. The Ohio Revised Code, section 3517.108, is very specific. It states that a primary election period begins on the first day of January of the year following the year in which the general election was held for the office that the candidate seeks, including any midterm election, and ends on the day of the primary election. So the primary for the 2022 election for statewide offices started January 1st, 2018. It is inarguable that the claimed discretionary expenditures of the chairman were made in any other than a primary election period. The specific law in Ohio, Revised Code 2913.02, theft is defined within the statute as no person with purpose to deprive the owner of property or services shall knowingly obtain or exert control over either the property or the services, without the consent of the owner or person authorized to give consent. And no, you do not have to have personally benefited from the unauthorized use of property or services in order for it to become a misappropriation of funds case. The Ohio Republican Party bylaws, by a reasonable interpretation of reasonable people, do not give the chairman millions of dollars of discretionary spending. Article 6, paragraph D of the Ohio Republican bylaws states, ORP candidate services will only be used in a primary campaign when the candidate is supported in accordance with the primary policy guidelines. According to state Central Committee members, no primary policy guidelines have been adopted. Paragraph B of the same article discloses that it is the state Central Committee that is to adopt the guidelines. Candidate services are in-kind contributions. The next issue on this topic is that this is a long-standing tradition for the chairman and is therefore allowed. Article 3, Section 1, Paragraph A of the ORP bylaws has a passage that states, the chairman shall also manage the affairs of the committee, perform all other duties prescribed by statute or usually exercised by the chairman and not inconsistent with these rules. So yes, you can have a long-standing tradition. It just cannot be inconsistent with the bylaws. Okay, so let's review. So far, the chairman of the party, at his discretion, used over $660,000 worth of candidate services, which are in-kind contributions, to support candidates in a primary election period without any primary policy guidelines being adopted by the committee. These expenditures are absolutely and incontrovertibly inconsistent with the bylaws. The chairman clearly did not have the authorization to make these expenditures. Next, the two direct expenditures totaling nearly $1 million to Yost and DeWine would appear to reasonable persons to be inconsistent with the bylaws as well. We know from the bylaws that the chairman cannot make expenditures inconsistent with the bylaws. So what do the bylaws have to say about discretionary spending? Article 3, Section 7 of the ORP bylaws is fairly clear on the issue of discretionary spending. If it is not approved in the bylaws, then all discretionary spending needs to be approved by a resolution of the State Central Committee. No officer or member of the committee shall have any power to bind this committee by any financial contract or obligation except as provided by these rules or by resolution properly adopted by a majority of the members of the committee present and voting and properly recorded by the secretary in the minutes of the committee. Furthermore, Article 4, Section 4 is a further check on the spending of the chairman. It states the Physical Review Committee shall consider and approve the budget, pass upon recommendations to the chairman as to staff and salaries, authorize expenditures, and arrange for the collection of funds. When members on the Physical Review Committee were asked about the $1 million in spending in those direct expenditures, they said they knew nothing about the spending. Unless the Physical Review Committee recants their story of being unaware of the chairman's discretionary spending, and they did indeed authorize this, then the chairman used the funds in a manner inconsistent with the bylaws. Now let's look at this reasonably and not at what the law says. From a layman's reading of the bylaws, one could reasonably expect that the power to make endorsements during the primary and approve spending on endorsed candidates is the sole dominion of the State Central Committee and not a power that the chairman can wield unilaterally. We have always had problems with the chairman putting his finger on the scales for candidates that they want. When I say they, I mean the swamp. I mean the elitists. It has been a long-standing tradition to disenfranchise and intimidate the state central committee. Letting the elites pick our Republican candidates has always gotten us blue and purple statewide office holders. They are catering to rich corporations and business owners that may not have our best interests at heart.
I do not. I do not. I think it's very important for the primary voters to make their choice. And they can't go wrong. We have great candidates in all of our statewide races in 18.
This doesn't happen very often. An endorsement in a contested race before the primary is seen as unfair by at least one of the candidates in that race. And in this case, that's Lieutenant Governor Mary Taylor, whose anti-establishment message was on full blast. When the Lieutenant Governor walked into the room Friday morning, she did so confidently, carrying a bold message targeting her opponent.
Good morning. Thank you for joining me here in Mike DeWine's living room. His entire campaign has been built on the air of inevitability, a false belief that it is his turn.
The applause was less enthusiastic when she finished her speech compared to when she started.
It was easy to draw conclusions about what my chances would be in this room today. The establishment has spoken pretty loud and clear.
And so did she.
I'm not asking for your endorsement here today. With all of the good old boy bullying and backroom deals that have got us to this point, I'm not sure I even want it.
Ohio Supreme Court Disciplinary Council would have filed a citation against any judge or any judicial candidate that would have pulled this dirty trick in any judicial race, and you know that, Sarah. So I think we ought to hold our chairman and our party officials to the same high standard. These negative attacks, of which I was a victim as well, and prevailed, as you all know that we're at the last meeting. I told you, Mr. Chairman, I would fight against those lies that you put out against me in your concerted effort to remove me from this committee, and I prevailed. You lied about my residency. You had staff here, paid staff, go after my job in Brookville. You had people file false protests against me. The documentation is here of all these races that the Ohio Republican Party rules were violated. And you have admitted you made those decisions. You need to be held accountable by this committee. If you wonder why things are happening at the national and state level the way they are, is because the everyday Republican voter gets it. There's a lack of integrity in this party. There's a lack of integrity at the national level. And people are no longer going to put up with it. So I ask my fellow members on this committee, this has to be resolved, not by these goofy statements, well, we all have to come together. That's the past. Let's forget it. No, we can't forget it anymore. I will quote the late Bob Bennett. I remember years ago, I've been on this committee off and on since 1996, and we had an example of a corrupt sheriff down in Fairfield County. And Mr. Petro was going after that sheriff and investigating, and Bob Bennett said to a state central committee, if we don't clean our own house, the Democrats will. And it's time that we start following the party rules. This is a clear violation. I think it ought to go to the Rules Committee. And Mr. Chairman, I do look forward to what your response is going to be.
If the Central Committee members do not make endorsements and do not draft a platform for the party, then why do we even have or need a state Central Committee? This event should not be glossed over and explained away as some misunderstanding. The appearance of impropriety is deafening. The appearance is that the party chairman is putting his thumb on the scale for a candidate of his own choice, or candidates of his own choice. We are not letting the free market of the primary allow us the freedom to choose our candidates that are on a level playing field.
What have our kingmakers gotten us? Ohio is much worse than it was in the 1960s. Since we stopped having state conventions, people are not nearly as passionate about the Republican Party because they feel whatever they say or do it will simply be overruled by the party elites calling the shots. By having a docile, complacent, and uninformed state central committee that has no vision and does not hold candidates accountable, we have a party that cannot get conservative policies put into place because it has moved so close to the center or left of center that no one knows if the party actually has any values anymore.
There are many members of the state central committee that are acting very unethically. If you're an appointee of a statewide candidate, or your spouse or family members are, you need to recuse yourself from any endorsement vote. Again, the optics are spectacularly deafening. This improper influence must not be allowed to stand. It has every element of a bribe. If you are an appointee, you should consider resigning from the State Central Committee. Lead by example.
Let's look at ethics. Let's look at the State Candidates Fund. Brian Colleran and Daniel Parker were very big donors to the State Candidates Fund. Most of that money went to the campaigns of DeWine and Yost. While it is perfectly legal for these individuals to donate to the fund, they were implicated in a major fraudulent Medicaid billing scheme. Together, they own 57 nursing homes under the foundation's Health Solutions Incorporated moniker. A scheme where they had to make nearly $20 million in restitution for fraudulent and unnecessary billing. State lawmakers accept millions of dollars for their campaigns from nursing homes, and then those lawmakers get to determine how much to pay individual nursing homes for the care out of for the Medicaid patients, the source of most nursing homes' revenue. How does that look to the public?
And what about John Cafaro, the father of former Democrat Senator Capri Cafaro? He made a major donation to this state candidates fund, yet he pled guilty to trying to bribe Congressman Trafficking, and he recently had to pay $250,000 in fines for a campaign finance law violation. How can we say that we are an ethical party when we knowingly take money from unethical people? Sure, you can do it, but should we?
It may be said that we are trying to harm the Ohio Republican Party, Patty and I. I want a strong and vibrant Republican Party so we can pass conservative policies at will. We currently do not have that now. We haven't had it. To say I'm a Democrat in Republican clothing is just out of line. I have the best interests of the party at heart. Besides my work with Republican parties in other states, my biggest claim to fame in Ohio is running the Ohio Republican campaign that unseated the Democrat chairman in 2014. The feat that the Ohio Republican Party said absolutely, positively could not be done. Chris Redfern lost his seat in the state assembly, and then the Democrat Party made him step down as party chair. The seasoned elitist got beat by a political novice with no money.
And I've been involved with grassroots Republican organizing for more than 30 years in Northeast Ohio. I have 5 grown children that were in the military, and I want to see a better future for them and my grandchildren. We can't do that if we don't have a county and state central committee that is unwilling to stand up and do what is right. We will be mired in corruption forever, and Ohio will never be a good place to do business.
If you're on the state central committee, we hope you look at what your duty and responsibilities are. Is not to look the other way. It really does matter on how you play the game.
And if you are a county central committee person, now is the time to stop worrying about your standing in the party and stand up and do what is right. Now is the time to put this state central committee on notice.
First stop is Middletown. Now, Middletown used to be a nice place to live and grow up until the 80s, and then things started going downhill. Good paying jobs left or shut down. Armco Steel sold out to Japan and became AK Steel, and then Cleveland Cliffs took over. A lot of funding's been cut, and then Section 8 housing started to infiltrate Middletown. Drugs are out of control. They closed down their public schools and stopped doing a lot of community things like the 4th of July festival for fireworks. Today, they're tearing down historical buildings at an alarming rate, taking away what many people remember about Middletown growing up. It's like they're erasing what many consider the pride of Middletown. The city lost its identity and is definitely not the place it used to be by a long shot. Crime-wise, it's not the worst place you could live. It ranks 24th worst in the state, so it could be worse. But drugs and shootings continue to make this a place that needs some TLC. Sadly, we come to an even worse place to live in Ohio, Springfield. Tucked away out in Clark County, about halfway between Dayton and Columbus, Springfield has very little in terms of jobs, and a quarter of the population lives in poverty, for starters. Springfield also ranks as the state's 7th most dangerous place. The city of 60,000 people saw 2 burglaries a day on average, which is the 2nd most in the state. A lot of that has to do with drugs. Ohio, as a state, has the 2nd highest drug overdose rate of all states, and Clark County ranks 3rd for drug overdoses. Coming in for a landing in Chillicothe. We built this city, and now it sucks. People in Warren are like, I thought we were bad. Chillicothe takes the cake for shady druggies who linger at gas stations and liquor stores. The poverty level is high, and the spirits are low. And the lingering smell from the paper plant is defeating. Again, due to the high levels of drug addiction, crime is bad here. There's only one other place in Ohio where there are more drug-related robberies and crimes than Chillicothe. Every year, a resident here has a 1 in 13 chance of being robbed. Ross County ranks 3rd in the state for number of overdoses per capita. Are we seeing a pattern here already? Toledo is not. A quarter of the city's 275,000 people lives in poverty. Per capita, Toledo has between double and triple the number of assaults, rapes, and burglaries than other cities on this list. Abandoned and dilapidated houses means there's drug dens around every corner. The schools are terrible and overcrowded. Toledo Public Schools just scored an F, according to the Ohio Department of Education. The roads are notoriously bad. Some say Toledo's becoming Detroit South. We're in the town of Mansfield. The city of 46,000 people lies along I-71, about halfway between Columbus and Cleveland. Sadly, the poverty rate here is about 1 in 5 people, and the unemployment rate's about twice the national average. The median household income is $22,591, and 48% of the population is below or close to the poverty level. This is your typical Rust Belt city, which struggled to survive during the late 70s and 80s after an abrupt decline in manufacturing because heavy industry sought cheaper overseas labor markets. The GM plant closing here meant tons of lost jobs. A bunch of vacant, rundown buildings, broken windows, prostitution, crime, and drugs has overwhelmed Mansfield. Like many other cities and towns in Ohio, Mansfield was a great place, but is now known for its prison, high rate of overdoses, and its rundown factories. They're like, haha, you're worse than us. Kinda. Sorta. Ashtabula is located on the banks of beautiful, not really, Lake Erie, way up here in Ashtabula County. The median income per capita is about $17,000 a year. A whopping 35% of the population lives below the poverty level. Part of that's because only about 1 in 10 people here has completed college. Now, back in the day, you could have a good job in Ohio and not have to go to college. But today, without college, it's likely going to be a fast food job, a dollar store job, or a cell phone outlet job. Drugs are rampant here, which is why homes here cost about $70,000, which is totally crazy for a place that sits on the water like this. But when there's trash all over the beach, who wants to visit it? That's mean. Captain had to say it like that. Crime is out of control in Lima. This is the 9th most dangerous place in the state, and Lima has the 2nd highest number of rapes in Ohio and a ton of arsons. Like, Cleveland is 10 times bigger, and it only had double the amount of arsons that little Lima had. What's the deal? Why are they burning everything down in Lima? The school system here is in shambles. Lima has all new school buildings, but they are ranked among the lowest in Ohio. There are hundreds of unoccupied houses used as drug houses and flop houses for homeless people. I mean, look at this list of homes that needs to be demolished right now. And hardly a week goes by that one of these dumps mysteriously burns down. Portsmouth has become well known for its overall malaise. This is the 5th poorest place in the state of Ohio, where nearly 40% of the city's 20,000 residents lives in poverty, and where the average income is just under $30,000. The number of people out of work is more than twice the nation's average. It's a filthy city, where houses are in decay, and the #1 industry is illicit drugs, and that is so sad, Portsmouth. In fact, Scioto County ranks 1st for OD deaths in the entire state. It's the 2nd poorest place in the state, and people make even less here than they do in Portsmouth. Youngstown pretty much well died in the 70s when the steel mills shut down, but it was their own fault. The steel companies didn't want to comply with EPA standards and install new equipment to lower their emissions. And despite the steel mills boning out, a lot of people never left this valley way out here in Mahoning County along the Pennsylvania state line. And after 40 years of economic freefall, the best they can hope for here is completely closing off or demolishing the abandoned residential neighborhoods like Oak Hill and Lower Gibson. Dayton's the 2nd worst place you can live in the state of Ohio. This is the 3rd most violent place in the state, and the place with the 2nd highest number of murders. Dayton also ranks 5th highest for burglaries and 5th highest for rapes. 2 cars are stolen here every single day. For a city of 140,000 people, that's a lot. West Dayton's horrible, and East Dayton is death. This wasn't always a bad place. There were big companies here to make good money with, like NCR and General Motors and Standard Register, Mead, Frigidaire, Panasonic, and even the railroads. But today, so many homes are boarded up and buildings have been knocked down. Once the jobs are gone, the city starts to die. Most of the burglaries and prostitution and cat thefts here are all directly tied to the heroin fentanyl problem. Although apparently, the city has improved its drug treatment program, so that's good. The worst place you can live in Ohio is in East Cleveland. The state's lowest incomes, highest poverty rate, and highest unemployment rate are here. On a positive note, East Cleveland is only the 39th most dangerous city in Ohio of the 232 places measured. There used to be 40,000 people here. Now it's barely 16,000. East Cleveland's tried really hard to get Cleveland to annex them, but Cleveland wouldn't buy it. They're smarter than that. EC started out as a wealthy suburb. Even J.D. Rockefeller had a mansion here. In the 20s through 50s, it was poor but clean and a mix of mostly Irish, Italian, and Jewish families. But in the mid-60s, the national phenomenon of white flight hit East Cleveland. By the 70s, it was unrecognizable. Now there's tons of abandoned homes here. A lot of people live in public housing or in shady apartments on government subsidies. Community leaders need to rally people because they need financial, emotional, spiritual, and mental assistance.